first off, I want to just explain a little bit about EYEJ and that our YODJ and discussion series program where we talk about relevant topics that, youth face. We've been doing this for 6.5 years and served 1,500 students. And we've had over 650 people help make this happen. And the reason why I bring that up is that our 650 people have been incredibly diverse, just like you're seeing on this panel. And so in particular, we might partner, for example, a doctor from Cleveland Clinic with a returning citizen to talk about something like civil rights and to have a discussion with our youth so that they can hear different perspectives about the topic and learn from each other, because the kids a lot of times have more insight than our adults at times. And so I think that's a very powerful tool in order to create solutions around social justice. And before we go into the question, Kenyatta, I also, and this will lead into kind of the answer to your question, I'd also like to dedicate, in addition to Tamir Rice, this EYEJ Speaks to Adele Johnson, who passed away yesterday, which I got to spend a lot of my time growing up with her. And the reason why I bring this up is she is the one who actually taught me a lot about civil rights and also her time with Black Panthers. And as you know, with curriculum growing up, when I was growing up, we didn't necessarily have a truthful history of our past in this country or the world. And, according to, I found the statistics, according to Southern Poverty Law Center, which is an incredible organization, they did a study on the education about civil rights in the United States and called it dismal. They actually did a rating and found that 35 states received an F score for their teaching of civil rights in this country, which is really horrible, but also leads to why we teach civil rights and talk about civil rights in our YODJ and discussion series, because the truth of it is that many of our youth really don't know about the history of civil rights or the civil rights movement. And also in our civil rights curriculum, we also go in depth about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And what's really scary is that, and again, this is not just for the youth that we serve. This is including my daughter. This is including many different type of school districts. They're not discussing this. And if they are learning about the Constitution and Bill of Rights, like me, who about it in the second grade, 35 years, we don't remember anything about it. Because as you know, with topics and discussion, we need to repeat it. We need to constantly talk about it, especially something like civil rights. And so I just want to encourage, I'm not going to talk too much today because we have such a great panel, but I just want to encourage parents that are listening to this to encourage your students, I don't care what background you're from, to really learn this summer about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, especially what we have coming up with the election.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that many individuals from EYEJ have experienced the dilemma of transferring to online remote classes from the traditional in-class lectures, just like many of the students we've served and other youth in our city. However, they didn't have the resources needed to make that switch. So focusing on connectivity is very important to our council because it will help us connect with the youth and help the youth connect with the world. So bringing attention to those who lack access won't be very difficult, given the fact that they know it's needed and it's a necessity. It's all a matter of getting the word out and getting people on board.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say something that I think is important to keep in mind for coalition building is that we're always conscious that the voices of those who are directly impacted are always centered. So obviously we need everyone to participate and advocate for systemic change. There's room for everyone at the table, but I think that it's important that when we're organizing and when we're, you know, working for change, that we are centering Black voices and experiences, and that we are making an effort to listen to those who have directly experienced the impacts of discrimination. So that's just kind of something that I think is important to keep in mind as we do this work.
When you're talking about everyone at the table, that the police are also people. And so on a grassroots level, to actually have a conversation, learn the chief's name, have them learn your name, have that conversation, and appeal to, you know, the humanity that's in each of us. So the very things that the protesters are demanding, those attributes also exist in these individuals, the police. So it's not just the police department, it's these actual individuals. And so those conversations of listening to their perceptions of the communities so that they actually are knowing you as Lori and not as a 50-something-year-old Black woman, right? That perhaps might think twice when acting, or perhaps speak up. This is towards coalition building. So then you get to that point of relationship where they're more amenable to be at the table when you're discussing issues. But that needs to happen first. That relationship building is critical, you know, on all levels, and anyone can do that. Any citizen can do that. An event just happened, I think yesterday in Shaker, where the Shaker police ended up playing ball with a group of kids, right? And this is very powerful. You hear those kind of things happen, you know, dotted throughout the country, and it always makes that special interest story. Probably happens a lot more than what makes the news. But to capitalize on that and talk to them, not necessarily the beat cop on the street, but make an appointment and meet the lieutenant or the chief, people who can affect change, and listen, and then hopefully you can have a dialogue to just get to know each other, one another first. So I think that's critical in any relationship. I mean, any forward movement. It can't just be an us and them. You need to give them a face and give a name and understand their perspective. And they will listen. I am married to a law enforcement officer. And so if you can imagine, just through the years, we've had several different conversations, and most recently with what's happening, to get the perspective of the culture, that cop culture, which is alive and well. But even putting that aside of just talking to a police officer as a person, as you want them to do. You know, and he says 10 times out of 10 times, unless you're really dealing with someone who really shouldn't be a police officer in the first place, other than that, you can appeal to the humanity and have a decent civil conversation of just getting to know each other, especially when you're talking about kids, what their activities are, and just kind of humanize them. And they will listen, because that's my main message.
I absolutely think it's important for white people to recognize their privilege as well as the system they've benefited from. I think it will also help if they realize that the same system they benefited from is the same system that has brought down people of color, predominantly Black people, and has been continuing to do so. So because of this, supremacy amongst the white has been the standard for this country. Therefore, I feel as if they should help us dismantle the system and rebuild it, because because they've built the system, they can easily change it, which they benefit more from, which is leaving us, you know, in the dirt, basically. So That's what I think.
If I could chime in, it seems to me that most of the institutions of American society are controlled by white people, and those institutions have been created to stay in control of the majority and repress African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos as well. I believe the police are a case in point, and I agree that it's useful to talk to police on a human level. But as an institution, historically, the police were created as slave hunters and to repress slavery and to make sure that slaves stay in their place. And in some ways, the institution of law enforcement is the same today. The civil rights laws that were passed primarily by white legislators, and they still have deference and give deference to the police as a source of imposing control and law and order. The very few schools, I believe, teach students of any color what the Bill of Rights say and what it means. And I believe that for students, it's a good place to start to know your rights. And I have a bias as a criminal defense lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer. I'm not anti-police, but I see police as a institution of repression, historically anyhow.
No, I agree. And another disenfranchised group are poor whites. And I want you to say that, sociologically, the police and that strata fits into that. They're not, economically, they are not high on the ladder if you look at the strata of institutions, the power. And so I wholeheartedly agree with you. One comment I just want to interject, and I don't know if this is a good place, but thinking of the audience, one thing that has eroded in schools are student councils. That is a mechanism from elementary school through high school. Colleges still have student councils, but they are also eroding in terms of people seeing any point in being a part of any kind of congregate group that has a voice to whatever establishment. And so what a student council teaches a young person is not only that they have a voice, but how to exercise that voice in a proper manner. And that training can build so that when they're to the point of being adolescent and being impassioned, as we're seeing now, that they have some tools. And so one of the critical things that I see is lacking is that people have a lot of emotion and a lot of passion about wanting to make change, but they do not have the tools in which to do that. So learning the Bill of Rights and learning the Constitution, absolutely. But if to marry that with, okay, now what? And how do you go about fighting those things? So and I don't think that is unintentional, that has happened, in different districts. Some of it's economic, or just is usually a staff teacher or perhaps a principal that has instituted that. It used to come part and parcel as part of schools. And just throughout my schooling, it just became less interest, less marketing of the importance of it. And I don't know of any in Greater Cleveland that are viable right now on the elementary school level.
And Lori, I will agree with you, no question, because student council also teaches you politics, but I think they have also been shaped in a different way, and that's why Cleveland has several youth councils, like, obviously EYEJ
Right.
Youth Council. So, kids can always form their own, obviously come join other youth councils as well.
I would invite people and you're doing the work, but with other groups to know what all those other, where they all are.
Yeah.
So there's a concerted effort and the marketing to invite other students. I think a district-wide council is of course much more powerful than the individual, school district. So that can happen to make your voice even stronger. But what happens on the very local level, learning how to navigate within your own
Community.
little system, just your community, which for a child is school, right? And you start out small and then work outwards, so that when you see all these larger than life, seemingly unsurmountable issues, you don't know where to start. And so that's why I was saying, like, the individual student council, and to the parents who are listening, that is something you can advocate for easily, to institute that in your child's school. And then you have that, the class representative, and then you have the president, all of that structure that exists to learn how that mechanism can work in terms of having a representative. And ultimately, you want that to lead to why we should vote, right? But just to say somebody turn 18 to vote, why? They haven't seen any benefits from that ever working. And so that's the other reason why, just as an exercise of seeing that representation, and if you don't like who's representing you, you vote them out, get someone new, it may be you, but that entire process is invaluable.
Yeah.
So I just want to interject, that is something that's very doable, that can teach children what the process is, and then map that against the laws of the, whether it's local laws or the Constitution. They have something to map that against.
100%. And I think I just need to make this statement too, back to Kenyatta's question, that it's important for me to say that it is absolutely up to white people to make change in this country. Black people are exhausted and tired, and that's, one part of it. But again, white people hold the power, they hold positions, they control a lot of, obviously, politics. Money is funneled in this country. But the one worry that I have is we're very off balance right now, where I see a lot of white people that are really stepping up to the plate to learn about what's going on, getting yourself educated, which is amazing. But it's really not enough. You have to keep in mind that this has been going on for hundreds of years, hundreds and thousands, and are being murdered. And really taking that step to create action is very important. So I just wanted to express that. And I think a lot of white people may feel stuck, and it's a very, you're going to go through a lot of emotions during this process. But one thing I just want to say about privilege is not a bad thing. Privilege can be very powerful, but it's about acknowledging your privilege, understanding the situation, and what you do with that privilege. That's what is very important.
And just to chime in on that as well, I completely agree with Mai 100%, but there are quite a few white people who don't know about that privilege that they have. As Gordon mentioned, the system has been set up, and designed for a lot of people to control everything, and for their kids and their grandkids to just walk into it. So they just continue the whole process of what they've learned and what they've seen without realizing or acknowledging anything on the side or what could possibly be wrong about what they're doing. So it is great that a lot of white people are stepping up, and it's quite amazing that they're coming to the level that they are. My girlfriend is white, and there's a lot of things that she may not have known about that I've gone through or I've experienced and seen, and same thing on the other side for her. Some things that she's gone through and she's experienced that I've never heard about. So it's all about teaching and learning on both sides of it, and then growing together and using that privilege that white people do have to go forward and to help all people of color. I mean, no matter who it is, in helping people of color, they're also helping themselves as well. So the whole thing is a big circle and a big cycle. So just by helping out and learning more, it's helping themselves and everyone as well.
We have been manipulated in this country to really think, okay, Black against white in a lot of ways. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people, just like in these protests, people from all different backgrounds are really realizing that it's not about black versus white. It's all of us against this white supremacy that has caused so many issues in this country.
Where we had assassinations of 3 leaders, where we had street violence, etc. And we ultimately ended in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was a plus. Things have not changed that much. And there's been a lot of talk, and not a lot of people are coming to the table. And I think all of that is good. But quite frankly, we have seen this movie before, and very little has changed in this country, notwithstanding what we went through, including the assassination of Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, Edgar Everett. And we really haven't traveled very far.
Yep. And I will lend some perspective. I will lend some perspective on that, because I had my own experience last week with, a group. But what I see is people are very afraid and have a lot of fear to go outside of their circle or their bubble at the same time. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be, because no one group can solve these issues on their own. It's impossible. We have got to work together. And so I think what's happening, what is needed in this country with our youth, with adults, is that we've got to be more open-minded. We've got to really pay attention, not let our anger really control our actions, but really paying attention where of the openness that's occurring, possibly bridging with people that you're not really used to bridging with, because there are people who are definitely fighting, who are definitely caring about the situation that we're in.
Whenever I do fair housing trainings, I always start with the historical context of our country's long history of discrimination and discriminatory housing policy. Because without this context, I think it is easy for people to attribute a lot of current issues that they see to maybe individual failures or just poor choices by individuals, but that's really not the case. And when we look at these discriminatory policies and how the system was set up, we see how systemic racism and oppression work, all the intricate ways that they have affected our communities and continue to impact our communities. So just a brief overview of redlining for those who aren't familiar. Redlining refers to the practice in the 1930s and 40s where communities of color were basically fenced off and marked as hazardous by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And what this did was discourage banks and lenders from giving loans or mortgages in those neighborhoods. And it really kept communities of color out of the American dream of home ownership, and really perpetuated segregation and inequality. And so even though redlining has been outlawed for over 50 years, we still see its effects today in Cleveland. So Cleveland is actually considered a hyper-segregated city. It's one of the most segregated metropolitan cities in the country. If we look at Cuyahoga County's redlining maps from 1940, if you compare that map to a map from today, things really have not changed much when we look at racial segregation and where people are living and who has access to opportunities and resources. So on the redlining maps, the original ones, there's kind of a C-shaped area on the east side of Cleveland, and that's still the same area that we see have concentrations of housing vouchers. That's a big thing that we talk about because even though, so when people have housing choice vouchers, the idea is that they have a rental subsidy that will help them really have housing choice and be able to move into a community with the resources they're looking for, and access to opportunities that they need. But aside from a select few communities, it's completely legal at the moment for landlords to refuse to accept vouchers. So what we see is that in a lot of the higher resource communities where folks might ideally want to use their voucher, they're pretty much restricted. And so they end up limited in their housing choice. And so it makes it tough to move past this segregation that we see and to move forward to true integration and true equitable communities. So even though redlining, the practice is outlawed and illegal, I want to note that there are a lot of new, more subtle ways that segregation still persists and still exists in our communities all over, but in Cleveland as well.
Just building on the impact of redlining, can we talk about the current impacts around criminal justice, education, wealth, even technology, and what advice and information can we provide to organizations and political leaders to begin addressing the determinants of redlining?
But something that I can add is, we have, in regards to redlining, we have an incredible problem in the city where approximately 30% of our youth do not have access to internet. The youth council that they on their own decided to focus on versus, police brutality and all that's going on with COVID-19, because they feel like that is real opportunity for us to really create realistic impact that can empower our youth for their future.
Yeah, and to add on to that, speaking personally, that's something that I see that's important to the youth in my community. And they also feel as if it's a civil rights issue due to the fact that that's where they get a lot of their information from.
Isn't a key to addressing the issue and breaking the cycle that Gordon discussed a systemic approach with a lot of conveners? When discussing the civil rights of students in schools, does it make sense for schools to examine the progressive discipline system that acts like police structures with detention, suspension, and expulsion? Isn't that teaching students compliance versus advocacy? Are these practices taking away student rights and leading to a school prison pipeline, especially for Black students?
A lot of things that have happened with the policing in schools was just allowed to happen without much question from the community as to why. Where is the data that says this was necessary to have security guards in schools? So that's the first thing. This question, not just passively accepted that that's where we are, that's the state of things. In terms of, I've always taught when I was doing parent training that the first thing you do when you get your HIS stuff is know that handbook, know what the laws that are governing the children are, because that's what you're fighting. You're not fighting against individual teachers, you're not fighting against the principal or even the school system. Mm-hmm. You're following those laws that are already on the books, which you take it again from that level, micro level, that can extrapolate onto the things that are Gordon are talking about. But you have to know how to do that. And so knowing that handbook, which explicitly states most of the time, do you have a number of hours or a number of days to be able to fight expulsions, that you have a right to a meeting prior to your child being sent home. All those kinds of things, those kinds of legal things that are all spelled out, but you have to take the time to read it because people will misuse it. And as we all know, children are being mistreated or unjustified suspensions or expulsions, what have you. So that's the first thing, that you have to know what's in the book. And then the second thing is the things that you want to challenge. You have some kind of a format. You have something to stand on as to question why. How did this come to be? Know when amendments were made and under what conditions, and all those kinds of things to educate yourself on what is happening. But that, against what I said earlier with student council, right, those things don't seem that they could coexist, and they can't, because I think that you're reading that the prison pipeline is alive and well. Period, right? It's alive and well. And the conditioning that goes for those who are watching it happen is just as powerful as what's happening to primarily those Black boys that's happening to, right? That you're saying that becomes acceptable because that's just the way it is passively. And so I also want to interject at this point about the media, and that it's intentional, and we keep seeing the same images over and over and over again to become desensitized of what happened. It's primarily, recently with George Floyd, to question that. Why is that? Right? And what's happening when that happens, that we're seeing in these images of someone being killed over and over again, that it's larger than I mean, that's an institution as well. So I want to interject that too, because that's a separate fight. But back to this, I don't want to get away from your question. You're absolutely right. The students' compliance versus advocacy. Yes, that is definitely one of the things that students and parents in that community are accepting of the changes that have happened in the last 20 years in public schools.
I just want to reiterate too, because we work with, for example, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and they're constantly talking about, reducing suspension rates and all that. But again, just to kind of back up what Lori is like, I think we need to cut the BS. Like we're just like in this vicious circle. We really need to have systematic change and fight for policy change, straight up.
Also, regarding student rights, I teach a course at the law school on prisoners' rights. And quite frankly, there is a very clear similarity between the rights of students and the rights of people who are incarcerated. Knowing the handbook makes sense, but the Constitution has limits once it enters the school. And students have limited rights based on the principal and the teachers knowing best, which they may, but students' rights are maybe an oxymoron.
Just talking about the handbook that governs children, the kids. Yeah, that is very limited. And the idea, even the notion of student rights has kind of emerged as I think in 1986, and I went to this march, and I remember, I don't want to misquote what it was called, but it was a march on children's rights, and almost a manifesto of the rights of children, and that has morphed into some of what you see in terms of advocacy, but you're fighting a losing battle because you need to know what is on the books of the governance in the first place. And that's the only point that I was making. But it's not about rights. It's about what a district has put in place to govern children, period. It has nothing to do with, it's not children's rights. It's what we are doing to the children if these things happen. Here are the rules of this, and this. And knowing what those are is the first point of changing any policy. You have to know what's there, and that's the point I was making. But Gordon's absolutely right in terms of student rights, and I intentionally didn't use that because I don't even frame it that way in my mind of the rights of students, because essentially a minor doesn't have any. I mean, that's not in vogue to say that, but it's true.
Yes.
You don't, but parents do, and parents have that voice and that right to challenge things, and what's good for what you see happening to one group, it usually doesn't come to the fore until it happens to someone perhaps outside that group. Wait a minute, say that's not right, and then it's questioned, and then it becomes an issue. People don't know what it is, so when things are happening to children and people don't have a recourse on how to fight, and being angry and being emotional.
Right, it's detrimental that, just being very honest, that it is detrimental that we empower our youth and amplify their voices and teach them about, for example, government, how to create policy, how to create social policy awareness and programming to make change. It is our job to raise them because they are our future, and we have completely set them up for failure. And reform is the only way. Systematic change, health reform, police reform, reparations and building generational wealth is the only way to create positive solutions in this country. And we all need to be focused on it.
So I'd say there's so many different key points that were touched upon in this conversation today, but one in regards to civil rights is to know that you have those, that you have rights, and they're not supposed to be stepped upon, and that you can actually fight for what's supposed to be yours. And in learning, as Lori mentioned, and learning different things aside from a handbook, but learning about history and different things that you can utilize and use as sort of a shield to help you block all the negatives that's coming your way in regards to your rights that you don't get. They're there, so you can actually utilize them. You have tools in different areas, especially from kids from YODJ to EYEJ to different institutions, from CASE and everyone. There are different resources out there for everyone to reach in regards to your civil rights. So know you have them, and know there are ways to make sure that you keep them and that they're utilized.
Demand to be heard, and don't fall asleep at the wheel. This may enjoy to suggest that we live in an equitable society and culture.
A takeaway I have for our viewers is that history tends to repeat itself. So it's our job to make sure our voices are heard and the youth voices are heard, to make sure that we make change.
We need everyone to really, if we're going to really create this systematic social change and create equitable communities, create a world that we haven't seen yet, but that we would like to see. We need everyone. Everyone's voice matters. And there's so many different ways to get involved. I think that people absolutely should not think that they're not needed in the movement, or because they don't feel directly affected that they're not needed. It was mentioned before, there's so many ways to use privilege for good. And so I just want people to remember that we need everyone if we're gonna really make change.
Just to add something different from the others, that you can identify exactly what it is that you're fighting, that you're precise in that, because it becomes very emotional, very taxing physically and emotionally doing this kind of work. And so that while you are aligning yourselves with other advocates and allies, that you are clear on what the power structure is and who you're fighting, that you don't become entangled in tangential issues that are important, but they could take you off your course and sap your energy. So that I would offer that.
I want to just really express that this is not a trend. This is an important matter that needs to be in our discussions every single day, no matter who you are. But also that our giving campaign, our Empower campaign, is really important to empower youth, just like Maranda. We are doing the work, and those dollars are very important for us. So if you have $1 to donate, we really appreciate it. If you don't, please share our campaign. That would be very meaningful for us. Thank you.